For many, Richard Schmidt needs no introduction. He is known internationally as a top professional surfer who travels the world in search of the biggest and most challenging waves ever ridden. Along the way, his accomplishments in huge surf at Mavericks, Hawaii, and Mexico have given him a respect that only a handful of the world's top surfers enjoy. Every summer, Richard returns to his home of Santa Cruz, California, where he operates one of the most successful surf schools in the world. In addition to lessons, he and his wife, Marisa, also run week-long surf camps. Over the years, Richard has developed innovative techniques that allow him to guarantee that every student will stand and surf on their first time out. Besides running his surf school, Richard has also worked for the city of Santa Cruz as a beach lifeguard for 15 years. He has mentored many surfers and become a legend in his own time. Although you may never become a world-class surfer, you'll experience the true joy of surfing, the sport of the kings.
Hi, I'm Richard Schmidt. Surfing has given me many unforgettable years of fun, health, and recreation. After teaching surfing for the last 17 years, I've seen what beginners have to overcome to learn. Hopefully, from this video, you'll learn how to surf safely and proficiently. Surfing has a rich history. Let's go to the Surf Museum located here at Santa Cruz at Steamer Lane and have a visit with Harry Mayo, a surfer from the 30s. You doing, Harry?
Hello, Richard. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Harry, I guess a long time ago, surfing was just preserved for Hawaiian royalty.
That's correct, yes. The commoners weren't even allowed to surf.
And what kind of equipment were these guys on?
Well, they had solid boards made out of wood over there. They solid like this board is here, but this is balsa redwood, but they had a koa wood. We didn't maneuver them very much. We put them on an angle and just stayed ahead of the foam right on the shoulder. In our day, the ride was the long ride. As far as we pick it up outside and go all the way to the beach, that was a good ride.
Nowadays, surfing is enjoyed by thousands of people all over the world. It's an endeavor that offers excitement and plenty of adrenaline. However, in between those moments of harnessing raw energy, surfers experience a connection with nature that can be serene, tranquil, and at times even spiritual. You never know what it might turn into for yourself until you try it. Surfing can be one of the most challenging sports to learn and can literally take years to master. But with the help of this video, you'll hopefully avoid many of the common mistakes that people make. Remember that everyone is a beginner at some point. Even renowned big wave riders have to start somewhere. Learning to surf when you're young is definitely advantageous, but age isn't as important a factor as physical conditioning. The biggest prerequisite and best cross-training for surfing is definitely swimming. The bottom line is the better shape you're in, the easier learning surfing will be for you. To enter the ocean should not be taken lightly. Before you grab your board and paddle out, you better assess the conditions and know your limits. Unlike a lot of sports, with surfing, your playing field is ever-changing. The most important aspect of the ocean for a surfer to understand are definitely waves. Waves are created by winds out at sea. One thing that's important to understand is that the bottom contour is what ultimately shapes how a wave breaks. Here is a pounding or plunging wave. This occurs when you have a swell coming out of deep water and hitting a shallow sandbar or a reef abruptly. Advanced surfers often prefer these types of waves because they're faster, more challenging, and offer opportunities for tube rides. However, beginners should stay away from this type of surf. A more desirable wave for a beginner is a mushy, slow-rolling wave which is more forgiving. This wave occurs when a swell approaches shore over a gradual bottom contour. When waves break down a point, they're called point waves. These waves are perfect for surfing as the bottom contour produces long, tapering curls. A wave spilling all at once, on the other hand, is called a closeout. Since there isn't much open face to surf on, closeouts aren't sought after by surfers. A reef break is a wave breaking over rock or coral. Reef breaks are very consistent in their shape and location. Be careful with reef breaks because there may be rocks submerged just under the surface. An indication of this may be boils on the surface. Beach breaks are waves that break over sand on an open beach. Since sand is always shifting, beach breaks tend to be a little more erratic and shifty. Oftentimes you'll find good waves near jetties or piers as they capture sand and create good sandbars offshore. If a wave breaks into foam and then turns into a swell and then breaks again, it's called a reef form. This occurs when a wave hits a shallow bottom, then a deep spot, and then another shallow bottom further in. Sometimes two waves come together and form one. These are called double-ups. They usually form a hollow, powerful break. This condition may also create rogue waves, which often sweep people off cliffs and beaches. A good rule of thumb is to never turn your back on the ocean. Even if you're standing where the cliffs are dry, a wave could come out of nowhere and sweep you off. We often have several drownings a year here in Santa Cruz due to people being caught off guard. In general, the bigger the surf, the stronger the currents are going to be. A longshore current is a current that goes down the beach parallel to shore. The longshore current is generally stronger in the surf zone as opposed to beyond it. Remember this when you're paddling up a point or up a beach and paddle well around the break. A longshore current can be very dangerous, especially if you're near something like a pier, or rocks, or a jetty where the current can sweep you into an area where you don't want to be. Here's a surfer barely managing to keep away from the pier. Lucky he knows how to duck dive or this would have been real trouble. Here on a calmer day, it's obvious where the longshore current is by the texture of the water. Rip currents are definitely the most dangerous type of current for any beachgoer. They can be an asset or a hazard depending on how well you understand them. As waves wash towards shore, they carry a lot of water with them. The water piles up in here next to the beach, and then you get a longshore current forming running down the beach. All this water in here has to get back out to sea somehow, so it forms a swift current going straight out through the surf zone. Once it gets out beyond the surf zone, it pretty much just dissipates in mushrooms out into deeper water. It's pretty easy to spot a rip. A lot of times they may be foamy, or if there's sand on the bottom, it'll be brown and kind of muddy looking. The surface texture of the water will have little waves, little rapids, similar to when you get a strong current in a river. Notice these rapids tend to build against the motion of the current. If a rip is over reef, the water may just look a deeper blue or a deeper green color. Since rips form in deeper water, you'll find that waves don't really break in the rip current. They'll break off to the side, but not in the channel where the rip current is. This is really deceiving for a novice. So many times I've seen a novice lose their board and swim straight into the rip to get into the calmer water. When you're caught in a rip and you're trying to get back to shore, remember never to swim against it and never panic. Relax, know the situation that you're in, and swim down the beach parallel to shore into the breaking surf, and then make your way to the beach, letting the waves help to push you shoreward. If you do find yourself in trouble, the universal distress signal is the waving of one arm. Tides are created by the gravitational attraction of the moon and the sun on the earth and its oceans. They're very important to surfers as they have a direct effect on how waves break. Some surf breaks are better at high tide and some are better at low. Be aware of hazards and conditions associated with tides. On a low tide, waves generally break steeper, further out, and over a shallower bottom. There may be rocks exposed where there weren't before. During a high tide, waves break closer to shore and are often more mushy in form, although the opposite can also be true depending on the contour of the bottom. You may notice that backwash occurs more often at high tide. Backwash is a term used to describe a wave pushing back out to sea. This often will make for choppier surf. In order to plan when and where to surf, you need to use your resources so you're never caught off guard. Acquire a tide book, which are free at any local surf shop. Buy a weather radio at a Radio Shack or any marine resource store. These are an essential tool for any surfer. Important info from swell size, direction and interval, wind speed and direction, and swell and sea forecasts.
Which will not decrease until Friday.
pay attention to signs or flags posted on the beach. This is a blackball flag, which indicates the beach is closed to hard objects such as surfboards and skimboards. A red flag means the beach is closed, and it may also mark a rip current. If a lifeguard is present, feel free to inquire about any potential hazard you may be unaware of. Jellyfish and man-o'-wars are a hazard to surfers, especially during onshore winds. If you're ever stung, wipe tentacles off the towel and wash with rubbing alcohol. Get to a doctor immediately if you experience an allergic reaction. Avoid walking on the bottom as you never know what you might step on. Sea urchins, coral, and poisonous fish may be present in the tropics, and stingrays may be present over sandy bottoms. If you're in an area known for stingrays, shuffle your feet to create sand clouds to scare them away. Kelp could be dangerous if you get tangled up in it during a wipeout, especially unattached floating clumps. If you're caught up in it, don't fight it like you see Gus doing here. It's best to use fluid, smooth motions and swim or paddle away from it, and it usually unwinds on its own. Remember, kelp is not always the enemy. It actually helps to break down wind chop and create glassy conditions. It makes a nice place to hang out for sea otters, as well as create an elaborate ecosystem for marine life. As you step off the beach into the ocean, you're entering the food chain. Although that's a scary thought, the reality is more likely you'll be hurt on the way to the beach. Let's go have a visit with Sean Van Zummeren, head of the Pelagic Shark Research Foundation, to shed some light on the subject.
Good. Hey, what's up, Sean? What you doing?
Good to see you.
You shouldn't go surfing if you're injured, especially if you're pouring blood or something like this. Even in the case of a small cut, if there is a shark in the area, they have very keen senses of smell. There have only been 12 fatalities related to shark attacks off of California since 1926. So if you put in that perspective with the number of people that are actually in the water, in and out on a daily basis, it's really the last things you have to worry about. More people are killed by farm animals worldwide than by sharks.
As a surfer, you spend long hours in the water, which can be hazardous to your health. Let's go have a visit with local legend Dr. Scott, inventor of Doc's Pro Plugs, for some preventive tips.
Yeah, good morning. The sea offers us many hazards, from the sun, the seawater, the cold, going from top to bottom. The eye, when exposed for long periods of time, can get sunburned, and it can develop growth called pterygiums on the cornea. You prevent this by wearing sunglasses whenever possible, visors. Then we've got to think about the skin with problems with skin cancers and melanomas. Prevention would be frequent use of the sunscreens. Problems with the cold result from conduction to the cold water, evaporation of water. Even in the tropics, there's cold and chill. Problems arise with hypothermia, where it's necessary to recognize when you're shivering and starting to feel numb. It's time to get out of the water and get warmed up. Otherwise, it could become quite serious, even leading to death. The other problems with cold are in the ear. The problem at the ear is called the surfer's ear. There's a bony growth that occurs in the canal that tends to close down the canal, and water gets trapped and the skin gets macerated, and you get problems with swimmer's ear, problems with hearing, and so the way to prevent surfer's ear is to keep the ear warm using Doc's Pro Plugs. They even have a little tiny hole in them so you can hear well and keep your balance. The other thing is to wear a squid lid or sport cap that's made of neoprene. And this will help keep your whole head warm and keep the ear warm.
Now that you have some knowledge of the ocean and what to expect, your next step is choosing the proper equipment to fit your needs. If your time in the surf has been limited, spending some time on a boogie board is not a bad idea. You could learn about wave judgment easier than being on a board. However, that's a whole other story and not the point of this video. This is your modern day surfboard. It has a rigid foam core and a hard fiberglass shell. The top would be called the deck, The wood down the center is your stringer. The sides are the rails, your nose, your tail, your bottom, your fins, and the rocker, which is very crucial, is the bottom curve of your board. Manipulating any of these features will radically affect how your board performs. Beginners oftentimes think they can learn on a board like this. In their mind, they're thinking this, but reality looks more like this. These boards are hard to balance on, hard to catch waves, very unstable. As you're learning, you need a board that's stable, easier to paddle, easier to catch waves, and easier to stand up on. The ideal board for learning is a soft board. They're made out of the same material as boogie boards. This way, the student doesn't become a hazard to everybody else in the water or a hazard to themselves. You may want to rent a board from a surf shop for your first couple of go-outs to help you decide what option to take. If you have a fiberglass board, a good wax job is essential. A good wax job should have small beads for better traction. Do small circular motions and press lightly to achieve this, using the edge of your wax. As your wax job ages, it may become slippery as well as add extra weight to your board. To take off, use a wax comb after setting your board in the sun to soften your wax. You may also use a wax comb to give old slippery wax a texture. Another way to apply traction to your board is with textured grip. It will protect your board against delamination as well as make a nice reference point where your feet should be on the board once you stand up. A good safety precaution which also protects your board are nose guards. If you end up learning on a fiberglass board, urethane-lined fins are a great safety option. When picking a leash, you want one about a foot longer than your surfboard. One thing you want to realize with a leash is that they do break. Never rely on your surfboard because sooner or later you're going to get caught out there without it. Always save enough reserve energy to make that swim in. When walking, never drag your leash as it may snag on something, causing a nick which will end up breaking later. One thing to realize about leashes is they could be your best friend by saving you from a lot of unwanted swimming time, but they could turn into your worst nightmare if they ever get tangled up on the bottom and hold you underwater. A good option for safety are these quick release models in case of this situation. Web gloves can be a great asset for paddling, but they're very hard on the shoulders. I would recommend becoming a strong paddler before trying these. I like using these gloves in big surf. Not only do they give you more speed when paddling into a wave, but more importantly, getting to the surface after a bad wipeout. Booties are great for added warmth and traction, but sometimes that added traction works against you when you're trying to position your feet as a beginner. Helmets are a great safety option, especially for beginners. If you live in the tropics, all you need are a pair of trunks to surf in. Unfortunately, not all of us are so lucky. Here in Santa Cruz, we wear full wetsuits all year round. Let's go down to O'Neill Surf Shop and talk with John Hunter, Head of Research and Development for O'Neill Wetsuits.
What I'm going to do today is take you through and show you all the features and benefits of what wearing a wetsuit can do. The Lycra Rash Guard is great to use if you're in tropical climates where you need sun protection. Although it does give you really good sun protection, it doesn't give you a whole lot of warmth. A new product that came out a few years ago is a polypropylene shirt. So polypropylene can work not just with a wetsuit as comfort and protection from a rash, but is also a great element to wear in tropic conditions to add a little bit of warmth but still protect you from the sun. If you need a little more warmth than polypropylene, you can step up into what we call like a neoprene vest. We also have neoprene shorties when you're still in those warm subtropical conditions. And then as you start getting into cooler conditions, you start seeing what people call a spring suit, and it's usually a wetsuit that has short legs and short arms. You can also see these, they will have long sleeves also sometimes, and that'd be a long sleeve spring suit. Then you can come into a full wetsuit, and in your full wetsuit, your first version would be a short sleeve full wetsuit. And then what they call a stitched wetsuit, this particular one being flat stitched, and we will touch on seam construction here in just a little bit. Then you go to a colder water full suit, this being an O'Neill Heat wetsuit, which is one of the highest end glued-in blind stitch wetsuits that's actually sealed from the water. The seams are sealed. Take that guy there, and you'll also see that going on and on, you can come into a much heavier suit, one where it's actually 5 millimeters, 4 millimeters with 3 millimeters, and it has built-in hood. So as you can see, there are all types of products from Lycra to polypropylene to neoprene that are going to protect you from the elements. And what O'Neill has done is put together an entire line for all different sports, but especially surfing, that'll keep you protected from the sun or whatever cold elements are out there. One of the most important elements in buying a wetsuit is the fit of the wetsuit. The way a wetsuit works is if you have a skin-tight fit, any movement that you do produces body heat. With a skin-tight fit, that body heat in turn goes straight to the neoprene and straight back to you, and your body heat is constantly working and producing heat. If you have a wetsuit that is very loose and that has wrinkles in it, as I'm showing here, that allows a bigger layer of water and a constantly recirculating layer of water inside of your suit. Beyond having more water in your suit, your body heat that you're producing then has to go through that layer of water to the neoprene, back through the layer, and finally back to your body. So as you can see, having a tight fitting, not too tight a fitting suit, but having a tight fitting suit is going to be much warmer, and it's also going to be a much more comfortable suit. So now that we know that fit is the most important thing, let's go ahead and talk about seam construction, which really is the next most important thing. The oldest and least effective seam construction is what we call an overlock seam construction. And if you take a look at an overlock seam construction, one of the characteristics is it is rigid, and it's a standing up seam on the inside. If you look at the outside, it also allows an area where water can go through the seam, which is not an airtight seam. So a flat stitch would be a great upgrade for a first-time wetsuit or for the conditions where the water isn't quite as cold. The flat seam also has a tendency to be a little bit warmer than the overlock stitch because the seam is actually overlapped. So glued and blind stitch seam construction is the ultimate for colder conditions, and nowadays you will see the glued and blind stitch seam starting in about 2 mil and going all the way up to 7 mil. On the seam you also have glue. That glue is what causes an actual seal, and because both of the stitches only go halfway through the neoprene, you end up with a seam that doesn't leak. And a good demonstration of this when you're shopping for a wetsuit is to do the blow test that I've been doing. When you blow into a glued and blind stitch suit, you'll see that it holds that air, and in turn what that's going to do is keep that water out. And if you can keep the water out and you have less water in your suit, you're going to stay much warmer because, as I explained, the less water you have in your suit, the warmer you're going to be because you're not having to go and dry the water that's in your suit. One thing I would like to show is the incredible flex of this suit. Richie, you want to grab the other arm of this? And let's just show how far this new rubber stretches. Start walking away from me and let's show these guys. This thing is goo ball gummy. Now this, along with no zipper, is what the future of surfing will be. Comfortable, light, fast, everything you ever wanted to be, lighter and faster.
After surfing, rinse your suit with fresh water and don't hang it in the sun if you want it to last. Make sure you've done your homework and pick the right spot for starting out. If you pull up to a beach, grab your board and paddle straight out, you may find it's a lot bigger than you expected. If possible, use the buddy system. Go with a friend and keep an eye on each other. Spend some time watching the surf. While you're watching is a good time to stretch. It's easy to pull muscles because while surfing, you often get cold and tight and then highly contorted during a wipeout. Your body also responds the way you want it to when you're limber. As you're stretching, mentally prepare yourself for your surf. Try and get in a relaxed state. If you're tense, you'll end up burning up a lot of useless energy. An important exercise you may practice on the beach or at home is the transition from your stomach up to your surfing stance called the pop-up. If you don't have a soft board to practice this on, draw a line in the sand to mark an imaginary stringer. If you're using a line in the sand, the arch of your foot should land on the line. Let's see, you find, first of all, a good surfing stance. You don't want to be stiff. Let's see you guys bend your knees, low center of gravity, the better. Your hands are going to be kind of low for balance. Front foot not really sideways, turned out a little bit. Back foot sideways, maybe turned out just a little bit. Where you are now, let's see if you could lay on your stomach and come up to your feet and land in the same posture you're in now on the same spot on your board. That's kind of a hard thing to do for most beginners. But hands should be back behind your shoulders, not really gripping the board, but a little more up on the deck. And when you go to stand up, Remember to don't look down at your board, but arch your back and fall back with your head and shoulders as your front foot comes up underneath you. Okay? Okay, just a little too narrow in your stance there, a little wider. You should land on your board just a little wider than your shoulders. Your back foot should be sideways, front foot not sideways, but turned out a little bit. Really concentrate on keeping your knees bent. Your waist bent slightly, but not so much that you stick your center out. It doesn't matter what foot you put forward, but it's important to stand one way and stick with it if you want to learn faster. If you surf with your left foot forward, you would be a regular foot, and if your right foot is forward, you would be a goofy foot. Most people have trouble popping up in one motion. The only way to learn is by doing a lot of dry land simulation. It may be easier to perform this by using something as bricks under your hands to give more clearance for your feet to swing underneath. The pop-up is an essential fundamental for any beginner. If you can do this motion quickly to the right spot on the board, progress will come fast. As you approach the water line, scan the horizon for sets of waves approaching. By waiting for a lull in the surf, it'll be much easier to make it out. Remember, never dive when entering the water, as there may be submerged rocks or an offshore sandbar. A good general rule to remember is to never get your board in between you and a breaking wave. Grab each rail and hold it off to the side. If it's shallow for a long ways out, you can walk out with your board beside you for stability. As you're going through the surf, jump your board over the waves or grab the tail and push it through. As you get to be more experienced, you may end up entering the water off of rocks and cliffs. As a beginner, you should try and avoid this. If you ever enter water over rocks or a reef, hold on to your leash to keep it from catching onto the rocks. Here at Steamer Lane, we enter the water off the cliffs, which takes a lot of timing. Wait for a break in the surf and get into the water in between waves and away from the cliffs as fast as you can to avoid the next wave's impact. A lot of people prefer to throw their board off first and then jump in after it. Or if you're Sean Barney Van Buren, you could warm up for your aerials by starting with one off the cliff. Remember, know your limits. To jump off the rocks into a surf spot like the lane as you're learning would be like a beginning skier learning on an expert run. Another condition you'll end up dealing with, but one to avoid as a beginner, is entering a shore break situation. A lot of timing and quickness is essential. During a lull, make your way out as far as you can without getting creamed by the approaching wave. Jump over it and paddle quickly to get over the next wave. It's extremely important to be in the right place when you're paddling on your board. See how the board sits flat in the sand? When you paddle it, that's the way it should look in the water. You don't want to be so far forward that you see water coming over the nose, or too far back where your nose is too high. You want to have your chin about 3/4 of the way up on the board. When you lay on the board to paddle, make sure your body is perfectly aligned down the center of the board. Don't be crooked. Don't drag your legs off in the water. Make sure your legs are over the board. When you paddle, you want to reach forward. Hit the water with your elbows bent while reaching all the way forward. Come down alongside your board about elbow deep in the water and then follow through with your stroke. A nice, fluid, relaxed stroke is going to be a lot more efficient than a short, choppy, tense stroke. When you're paddling, try to isolate the motion to just your arms. If you put too much of your hips into it, you're going to wobble through the water. You want your board steady so that it planes. The butterfly stroke may also work well, especially when you're paddling for a wave. The last couple of strokes, you may want to do the butterfly to steady your board. To turn your board as you're paddling, you can reverse the motion on one side of your board while paddling out on the other side, as well as dragging your leg the direction you want to turn towards. For catching waves, you should concentrate on prone paddling. However, if your board's long enough, you should learn how to paddle on your knees on your way back out to give your prone paddling muscles a break. When you knee paddle, being on the proper spot on your board is every bit as important as prone paddling. Make sure the board is flat in the water. Keeping your knees spread slightly with your butt low is the most stable position. Another thing you need to get efficient at is getting your board around quick. Practice turning your board around by sitting up and rotating your legs in a modified egg beater kick, in combination with grabbing a rail with one arm and pushing or pulling water with the other arm. Your legs will rotate in the same direction but will not be synchronized. The further you sit back on the tail, the faster the board will come around, but the harder to balance. Anytime you're trying to get your momentum started from a sitting position, Remember as you go prone to do a frog kick with your knees straight as you simultaneously reach forward and jam your tail in to propel yourself forward. As you paddle out, the first thing you'll have to deal with is getting through the surf. Try and avoid the lip, as that's the most powerful part of the wave. When faced with small whitewater, try the push-up method. As with most push-through techniques, get a lot of momentum towards the wave and head straight into it. Just before the wave impacts, grab the board just behind your shoulders and do a push-up from your knees or toes, trying to get a lot of space between you and your board to allow the wave to pass underneath. When faced with more powerful surf, it's always better to go under rather than over the wave. On a long board, use the Eskimo roll, and if your board is small enough, use a duck dive. A really good general rule is you never turn your back on an oncoming surfer. Whenever someone's got a wave further out than where you are, you need to make an effort to move out of their way. It's bad etiquette to let go of your board. Okay, so a good way to protect yourself from a loose board or out of control surfer and still protect the other surfers by holding onto your board, you can use a maneuver called the Eskimo roll or the turtle. It's kind of like using your surfboard as a shield. Okay, now if I'm pointing straight in the wave and it still looks like it's going to be a close call, I'll grab forward with my hands as far as I could reach, okay? You really want to keep your back arched when you go into an Eskimo roll. And then you always want to roll away from the oncoming surfer, okay? So you get your board between you and them immediately, and then all the way upside down so you're actually under the board, maybe doing a frog kick with your legs to keep your momentum headed into the wave. When the surfer in the wave washes past, and you roll right side up and continue paddling out because there's probably another wave right on top of you if you're in the impact zone. To perform a duck dive, paddle towards the wave with as much speed as you can muster. Just before the point of impact, put your strongest foot on your tail. Roll that foot up onto your toes while using your other leg to counterbalance. As the wave washes over you, slam your weight onto the tail, point your nose upward, and go under and through the wave. The push-up, Eskimo roll, and duck dive are the main methods of pushing through surf, but when the waves are a little too powerful for the push-up, but not quite demanding a roll or duck dive, there are some different techniques which work well. Here is the technique where you sit up on your board just before the wave hits you, elevate the nose of your board so that it cuts through the top of the whitewater. As the board tries to flip you upside down, do a frog kick, keeping your knees straight, and throw your weight towards the nose. If done correctly, you should climb right over the wave. Here's a method where you sit up on the nose of your board, clutching tightly with your legs and holding onto the rails while leaning forward and sinking the nose as deep as possible. Although it's not advisable to turn your back on the wave, if you get caught off guard, sit up on the back of your board and clutch board with your legs while leaning back and sinking your tail. Swimming through the surf with your board is also a good technique to learn. Wrap your arm across the nose while submerging it and swim through the wave with your free arm and legs. As you're paddling out, don't ever get another surfer paddling out between you and a breaking wave, as they may get pushed onto you. You have to realize as you're paddling out, the surfers coming in have the right of way. Okay, and if a surfer makes one move, surfing in on the wave, the person paddling out has to go the opposite way, even if that means paddling into the break and getting a beating by the wave, okay? Normally when you paddle out, you're trying to get out past the breaking waves in the channel if there is one, so you're not such an obstacle to the surfers coming in. However, if the oncoming surfer needs to make an upcoming section, they may choose to surf past the paddling out surfer on the channel side. In this situation, the surfer must paddle into the breaking wave, even though it results in a beating by the wave. As you're learning, only surf the size waves you're comfortable pushing through with your board. If you're in an area that's shallow for a long ways out, or if the surf further out is beyond your ability, you may want to surf whitewater to start out. Wade out far enough to get some length of ride, and when a whitewater wave approaches, point your board straight with the wave and jump onto it while pushing off the bottom for momentum. Land on the board a little further back of proper paddling position with your back fully arched. If you're at a slight angle to the whitewater, it will flip you. Once you catch the wave, you may have to scoot a little forward to keep the board planing. You can also surf whitewater by paddling out of waves and spinning your board around as a broken wave approaches. A good time for this may be if you see a lot of waves on the horizon and you're caught inside. By catching a whitewater, you can surf further in away from the impact zone and then paddle out during the next lull. You may want to ride your first few waves in a prone position. Practice steering your board by dragging arms and legs off the side of the board you want to turn toward as your opposite arm lifts up on the rail. Keep your back arched to avoid digging your rails. When you feel confident riding in prone, next try to stand up. Ride prone until the board steadies before standing up. You want your weight to be centered equally over both feet with your hips under you as opposed to sticking your center out. The lower center of gravity, the better, so concentrate on keeping your knees bent. You'll notice all great surfers have a low center of gravity, so try and concentrate on this as you're learning, and it will end up becoming natural. Remember once you get up on a board to relax and stay loose. I notice that when surfers are tense, they can't find their balance, and every little chop sends them into a wipeout. Staying relaxed will help you to absorb chops. Think of your knees as shock absorbers. If you land off center, you'll either tip over or turn in one direction without trying. If you're too far forward, you'll probably purl. A sign of this is if you see water coming over the tip or the front of your rails. If you're too far back, you'll stall and probably miss the wave. If you do land in the wrong spot, you can slide your feet around and correct yourself. When standing in whitewater, you basically want to keep your board flat and in a plane. This may mean you have to lean forward over your front foot or onto your back foot or shuffle your feet forward or back. You should try and surf straight in with the whitewater, and once you master that, practice turning your board. Most people learn to turn a surfboard by leaning onto their toes or heels. However, to turn your board properly, it's a lot more than just your heels and toes. Sure, it works, but you'll dig your edges and fall off a lot until you learn how to rotate and pivot off your tail and fins in combination with your toe and heel leans. Make sure you start your turn from a low stance. Look, point, and rotate towards the direction you want. Imagine your hips and your shoulders as a unit working together, although sometimes your head and shoulders may rotate just slightly ahead of your hips. Try and put the majority of weight on your back foot and push your tail in the opposite direction. All good surfers have similar form, but since everyone has different body types and approaches, surfers develop unique styles. As you're learning, think about proper body mechanics like a low center of gravity and smooth rotating transitions, and let your style develop naturally rather than trying to surf like someone else. One thing you can count on in surfing is wiping out. This wipeout gave me a headache for 3 days. Most injuries occur to surfers from being hit by their own board, usually during a wipeout. Realize your board is never any further away than how long your leash is. As you're beginning, you should learn in small waves which only break in shallow water. Keep that in mind as you're wiping out. It's a good idea to always fall away from your board off the back or off the side. This way your board will be taken away from you by the wave. Try to avoid falling in front of your board. If you fall ahead of the wave in front of your board, not only will you fall into shallower water, but your board will come down on top of you. Realize no tug on your leash may mean your board is near. If you fall off head first, do more of a belly flop or shallow water dive. One of the worst things you could do is dive head first into the bottom. If you're falling backwards, and it's an extremely shallow situation, fall flat as well. Be careful falling feet first if it's shallow. You may land hard on the bottom and twist an ankle. During a wipeout when a wave has you in its grasp, curl into a ball with your hands over your head to protect yourself from your board and stay as relaxed as possible. There's no use trying to fight the wave when it has a hold of you. However, when it eases up on you, that's when you have to struggle and make your way to the surface. There's a fine line on when to go with the wave and when to offer resistance. When surfacing, come up hands first to protect your head. Especially protect yourself if you do a nosedive, or in surfers' terms, purling. Your board usually flies into the air, and when your leash catches, it pulls the board down on top of you. It's a good practice if you have purled to stay underwater longer to let your board land before you surface. After you tire of riding whitewater, the next step is to paddle out beyond the breakers and catch the swell before it breaks and ride across the curl. When you're in the curl, your options open up. More speed, maneuverability, and a smoother ride. However, as you try to attempt this, you'll realize that timing and positioning is not something that you'll learn overnight. After all my years of surfing, I find myself paddling for waves and missing them. Timing is not only critical on catching an unbroken swell, but also once you're up on the wave, you gauge your turns according to the wave's movement. Timing is the hardest thing to pass on to a student. It comes with hours spent analyzing the ocean's every movement. Once you get beyond the breakers, paddle to a spot where you saw waves breaking previously. You should have watched the surf for a while to determine this. Sometimes when surfing over reefs, boils on the surface will give a clue as to where the shallow spots are, which waves tend to focus on. Try to avoid paddling into the middle of a crowd. Although that may be where the best waves are, as a beginner you don't need the best waves, just something that will push you. As you're waiting for a wave, your focus should be on the horizon, always looking for a wave to catch. It's a good idea to mark where you're sitting with a lineup or reference point on land. It's better to try and pick two objects that line up as opposed to one. To determine where a good reference point might be, watch a set of waves come in and then paddle over to the place you should have been to take off. Immediately look shoreward and try to find two objects that are lined up. Trees, chimneys, telephone poles, distant ridgeline mountains all work well. Mark future waves where they break in relationship to your landmarks, and after a while you'll see a swell coming in a certain way and know exactly where it's going. The most common question I get from frustrated students is, when do I paddle for a wave? Unfortunately, there's no correct answer. If you position yourself properly, you can wait until the wave is just about upon you, take one stroke and catch it. If the wave looks like it will break way in from where you're sitting, you start paddling way before the wave gets to you into where it's going to break. Ideally, you want the wave to come underneath you just before it starts to break. Oftentimes you come over a swell and you see the next wave is one you can catch, but you have to do some last-minute maneuvering to get yourself in position. If the wave is going to break further out, you may have to paddle out to it and then whip it around to be in position. The wave may be building down the beach, so you have to paddle over to it and either sit up and spin the board or do a paddle turn to get yourself in the right spot to catch it. A good surfer can catch a wave at any angle. The angle to catch a wave may change according to how steep the wave is going to be as it comes under you. If the wave appears slopey and you're trying to catch it early, paddle perpendicular to the wave. This would be the ideal situation for a beginner, as getting in early is a lot easier than late. If it appears the wave will be a steep takeoff, or you're taking off just on the edge of whitewater, angle slightly into the wave the direction the wave is breaking. Make sure you keep your weight on the inside rail for control and to avoid burying your outside rail, which will throw you into shallow water with your board coming down on top of you. If you paddle straight into a steep wave, you'll probably purl. Angling will help you keep the nose up. If you try to angle into a wave that is slopey, you'll probably not catch the wave. The faster you're paddling shoreward, the easier the wave will pick you up. As you're paddling for a wave, take off your blinders, arch your back, and use your peripheral vision to look at how the wave is building behind you and for other surfers on your inside or paddling back out in front of you. If you're surfing right, anybody on your left has the right of way. If you're surfing left, anybody on the right has the right of way. Another right of way rule is the first person standing up has the right of way. There can be a lot of gray area with the combination of the two rules. This seems to be at the heart of the hassles between short and longboarders, as a surfer on a longboard can catch and stand up on a wave well before a shortboarder has even caught the wave. The sad reality for a beginner is that better surfers get most of the good waves due to their experience. Remember, being courteous, smiling, and respectful towards other surfers goes a long way. To gain anyone's respect, you have to give it first. To put the brakes on if you see another surfer has the right of way, straddle the board on the tail, grab the rails, and lean way back. Another time you may back out is if by catching a wave you may run someone over paddling out. As you're paddling for the wave, anyone further in should move out of your way, but if they don't, back out. There will always be another wave. And remember, if a surfer is going to catch a wave further out to sea than you, make sure and move out of the way to give them a clear shot at the wave. This is what happens when people drop in on each other. This is what can happen if the surfer paddling back out isn't attempting to get out of the way of the oncoming surfer. As you're paddling for the wave, realize that when the wave comes under you, it lifts your tail and may force your nose down. To compensate for this tail lift, arch your back the instant the wave hits your tail, and that will bring some weight back and help keep your nose up. On the other hand, if you feel the wave is passing under you and you're not catching it, lay your chest and even sometimes your chin on the board to get some weight forward. It's amazing how much weight can be distributed by how much of an arch you have in your back. As soon as you've caught the wave, ideally you want to stand up right at the top. If you're taking drops on your stomach, it's hard to avoid purling as your weight is far forward when lying prone. If you're on your feet, it's a lot easier to keep the tip up by just leaning onto your back foot. On the other hand, if you stand up too early, you'll watch the wave pass under you. Sometimes you have to paddle with the swell for a while before the wave picks you up. Other times, if the wave is steep, you'll need to stand up as soon as the wave hits your tail. When most people catch their first unbroken wave, they shoot down the face and ahead of the wave. They lose speed, the wave catches up to them and mows them over. To avoid this, it's a good idea to set your inside edge to turn across the wave, as well as for more control. You should learn to turn your board according to how fast the wave is breaking. A fast down-the-line wave takes an extreme angle to stay in the curl. On the other hand, on a slow, peaky wave, your angle can just about be straight and you could still be in the curl. If you turn at a sharp angle on a slow, peaky wave, you'll turn right out of the wave. If you go too straight on a fast wave, you end up in the white water. Here's a regular foot surfer going right. He's surfing the wave frontside. Being frontside, it's a lot easier to see the wave and react to it. Here's a goofy foot surfer going right, and he is backside to the wave. It's a little harder to see the wave backside. When surfing backside, try and open up your leading arm for better awareness, and this will also help to initiate your turn in that direction. Your first goal in the curl would definitely be trim, cutting across the wave at the angle required by the speed of the breaking wave. Your weight should be forward and on your inside rail. Accomplish this by leaning on your front toe if you're frontside or front heel if you're backside. Take your leading arm and reach towards the wave face. This will help to put your weight on your inside edge as well as help rotate your body the direction you want to turn. You should be up on the wave face as opposed to down the flats ahead of the wave. To set up trim, you could set an edge and turn on the way down the face, or drop down to the bottom of the wave and do a bottom turn. Usually when you do a bottom turn on a longboard, your weight is on the tail, so as you're coming out of the turn, you may have to move forward to achieve trim speed. After you accomplish trim, the next step would be climbing and dropping on the wave face. If you end up surfing too far ahead of the curl, you'll lose the wave. To stay with the wave, you may have to turn back towards the break. This maneuver is called a cutback. Hopefully you can get to the point where the wave doesn't end up in a wipeout, rather with a kick out. Do this by making an extreme turn out and over the wave. Or, if you're in the white water, move to the back of your board and put your weight on the tail. Your board should stall out and the wave should pass underneath. After kicking out, drop down to your board by dropping a leg off to one side as you collapse down to a prone position. A complete ride makes the water safer for everyone. If you fall off and let your board fly at the end of every wave, eventually it will end up hitting someone. Most surfers will use a kick out when the wave closes out, or to avoid running into rocks, or to give an inside surfer the right of way. If you're heading for something like rocks and aren't sure how to put the brakes on or kick out, you can always bail off the back of your board as long as no surfers are nearby for your board to hit. After kicking out or wiping out on a wave, you're usually left in the impact zone, so you must be very quick about getting your board turned around and headed out to sea or over to the channel. If you've just wiped out, usually your board is between you and the beach pointed towards shore. Get to it by swimming or grabbing your leash and pulling it to you. Don't pull yourself onto it until you've turned it around by grabbing onto the tail with a hand on each rail and kicking with your legs. Once you've got it pointed at the angle you want to paddle towards, pull the board under you as you slide forward. At this point, you're left in the impact zone and in the oncoming surfer's line of fire, so reaction time is crucial. Getting out of the water may be a completely different situation than when you enter due to tidal change. Make sure you have your exit planned before you enter the water and take the tide into consideration. On your way in, never surf a shore break wave as a beginner. You may end up busting out your fin or even worse, get drilled into the sand. Many surfers have sustained serious neck injuries in shore breaks. Wait for a lull and then come in on the back of a swell and up the beach before the next wave hits. Coming out of the surf over a reef may be tricky, especially during a low tide when the rocks are more exposed. Sometimes it may be easier to come in fins up and forward to avoid busting your fins out. If it's too shallow to ride in on a wave, try walking next to your board, keeping your weight over the board to enable you to tread lightly. Getting out of the water, especially during a high tide, can be a big challenge. You basically learn how to be a crab. You want to get washed up to your exit point on the back of the whitewater. As the wave recedes, you scurry up the rocks before the next wave hits. Or if it's shallow enough, get off your board well beyond the rocks and wade your way to your exit point. Waiting for a lull in the surf will also make your exit easier in this situation. If you miss your initial exit attempt, turn around, get over the next wave, and try again. Never get caught at the point where the wave impacts the rocks. Try and keep your surfboard between you and the rocks. However, in this situation, you may need that arm closest to the rocks to grab hold. If you do get your board between you and the wave and it hits you, make sure and lift the board up to allow the wave to pass under. When new to an area, it's not a bad idea to sit and watch how other surfers negotiate their ins and outs. Over the years, I've made numerous rescues using my surfboard. Sooner or later, you're going to run into a hapless victim that needs your help. Remember to always offer them your board if you're comfortable in the situation without it, but never let a panicking victim get a hold of you. As you're surfing, keep an eye on other surfers and make sure they come up after wipeout. Take a course in first aid and CPR. The most common injury to surfers are cuts from fins or sharp noses. Remember, you can control bleeding by simply applying direct pressure and elevation. As a surfer, your connection with nature becomes very precious. With that in mind, let's talk with Bruce McGee from the Surfrider Foundation.
The mission of the Surfrider Foundation is to enhance the nearshore waters, the playground in which we surf. You can do your part by joining the Surfrider Foundation.
There's so many different directions to take your surfing. It's an individual pursuit where you can express yourself any way you want.
Well, if you haven't figured it out, I'm Wingnut and I like to ride longboards. My whole philosophy on surfing has always been about do whatever it takes to have fun. Fun for me comes with riding a longboard. I just like the natural glide that you get from a longboard, the ability to trim a wave really clean. You know, longboards have that ability to walk the nose, hang 5, hang 10, do a nice smooth drop knee cut back.
I'm Jay Moriarty. There's just so much freedom and enjoyment in it. You know, it's just so pure and just really fun. Just one of the most purest things that I could think of doing, and I don't know what I'd do without it.
My name's Jason Collins, and my favorite aspect of surfing is flying down the line, doing big aerials, having fun on the wave, not being so serious. I think you'll have fun too.
Hopefully, the things I've gone over in this video will make learning surfing an enjoyable experience. Set goals for yourself, but don't be discouraged if they don't happen overnight. The reality is, surfing takes a lot of time and dedication. Count your blessings and realize that surfing is a unique experience that should never be taken for granted.
I'd say it's all about respect, and you know, there's people that have been in the water a long time, and if you show the respect to them and stay out of the way and don't paddle for waves when you see guys going, a lot of times a lot of best surfers, you know, they'll give you advice and help you out if you know you show them their respect, and they deserve it. I mean, they've been around a long time.
You need a nice big board to learn on to produce a good style, you know. That has a lot to do with it. You get on a bigger board, you get good style, you learn a lot quicker, and you learn a lot easier. You know, there's no reason for some beginner a year into it or even a month into it, to ride a board that thinks you can go out there and rip on, you need to learn the fundamentals on a nice, sturdy board. Gives you good balance. And I think that's the key. Getting on the right equipment has a lot to do with learning how to surf.
Learning the basics and sticking with the basics is the key, you know, before you start trying to get too radical. You gotta like be able to do the basic maneuvers and learn the proper surf etiquette.
The best thing I think would be to avoid super crowded spots if you can. If you're just beginning, you're going to get a lot more waves. More riding time equals quicker progression.
You have to start with the basics. Basic etiquette, basic knowledge, basic skills. Just start off so basic and plain and simple, and with your equipment and all that. And it's just the most important thing.
Just be aware of other people and, you know, people coming at them, and just where to paddle and stuff so you can get out of people's way and holding onto your board.
You know, people who've been in the water and put more time in the water obviously get more respect. It's not that they're better than you or anything like that. It's just that you know, it's kind of, you show respect and then you get respect.
San Cruz City Limits. Welcome, Population 1, Campbell Soup. The man. Yeah, boy.
Somehow you didn't expect it. I knew it just the same.